Most people think a trade war looks like a headline on a screen or a shouting match between politicians in suits. We are conditioned to believe that geopolitical conflict happens in negotiation rooms or on stock market tickers. But that is a lie. Real economic warfare is quiet, it is slow, and usually by the time you actually hear the noise, the damage has already been done. We are standing at that exact moment right now. The silence has just broken. For the last year throughout 2025, there was a theory that Canada could ride out the storm of a second Trump presidency. There was a belief that the erratic tariffs, the threats, and the border friction were just noise, negotiating tactics that would eventually settle down. But this week, specifically in February 2026, the black box recording of the Canadian economy was finally opened, and the data inside is catastrophic. We now have the confirmed numbers from the two most important companies in Canada. These aren't banks and they aren't tech startups. They are the arteries of the entire North American continent, CN Rail and CPKC. The financial reports released this week show a combined direct loss of over 550 million US dollars. That is more than 750 million Canadian dollars evaporated, not because of bad management and not because the trains broke down, but because the trade environment between the United States and Canada has become so toxic, so volatile, and so unpredictable that the physical movement of goods is starting to freeze. This is the moment the silent economic war became loud. And I need you to understand something very clearly right at the start. This $550 million loss is not a corporate problem. It is not something that stays on a balance sheet in Montreal or Calgary. This is a signal that the backbone of the Canadian economy has been fractured. When the railways bleed this much money, the pain does not stop there. It travels down the line, it ends up on your kitchen table, it ends up in the construction cost of your home, and it ends up in the inflation rate that destroys your savings. We are looking at a supply chain shock that is about to make the last few years look like a warm up. Let's look at what actually happened this week because the details are buried in financial jargon that we need to strip away. The executives at CN Rail and CPKC, the people who actually see the flow of every commodity in North America, came out and admitted that the system is failing. Janet Drysdale from CN Rail didn't mince words. She explicitly stated that trade uncertainty and the volatility of Trump's border enforcement wiped out $350 million from their revenue. Keith Creel at CPKC confirmed another $200 million in losses. But here is the catch, and this is the part that should make you nervous. They aren't just talking about the tariffs themselves. Tariffs are math. You can calculate a 10% tax. You can budget for it. What they are describing is something far more dangerous: uncertainty. Donald Trump has weaponized uncertainty. By raising tariffs, then pausing them, then threatening them again, he has created an environment where no business can plan for next month. If you are a manufacturer in Ontario or a lumber producer in British Columbia, you cannot ship your goods because you don't know if the price will jump 25% while the train is still moving, so you don't ship. The volume drops, the network slows down, and that is what costs these railways $500 million. It is an invisible tax on the entire continent. Now, why does this matter to you? Why should you care about railway revenue? Because railways are a leading indicator. They are the canary in the coal mine. In an economy as vast as Canada's, almost everything you touch travels by rail. The grain for your bread, the chemicals for your water, the parts for your car, the lumber for your house. When the railways take a hit this massive, they have only two options to survive. They either cut service or they raise prices. We are already seeing the first option. The efficiency of the network is degrading, but the second option is the one that is coming for your wallet. These companies have shareholders. They have operating ratios to maintain. They are not going to absorb a $500 million loss out of charity. They are going to pass that cost on to the shippers, who will pass it on to the retailers, who will pass it on to you. This is the inflationary echo. The initial tariff happens at the border, but the price hike happens on the shelf 3 months later. We are about to walk into a spring where the cost of heavy goods, appliances, vehicles, construction materials spikes suddenly, and the Bank of Canada, which has been desperately trying to cut interest rates to save the housing market, is going to find itself trapped. They cannot cut rates if inflation is roaring back because of supply chain costs. The irony is tragic. The very thing causing the economic slowdown is the same thing that will prevent the central bank from fixing it. But if we zoom in, the damage is not spread evenly. There are specific sectors of the economy that are currently being led to the slaughterhouse, and we need to look at them because millions of jobs depend on them. The first victim is the one that feeds us: the prairie farmers. Right now, as we move towards spring, farmers in Western Canada are preparing for the planting season. This is a massive logistical operation. They need fertilizer to arrive by rail, and they need to move their grain out to ports to get paid. It is a tight, time sensitive cycle, but the rail network is bleeding money. When railways look to cut costs, service to rural, remote areas is often the first thing to suffer. If the fertilizer doesn't arrive on time because the network is congested or too expensive, the crop yield drops. If the grain sits in the silo because the border is too risky to cross, the farmer doesn't get paid. We are looking at a potential liquidity crisis in the agricultural sector that could wipe out family farms that have been operating for generations. And for the consumer, that means the price of food, which has just started to stabilize, is about to take another jump. Then we have the industrial heartland. The situation in Ontario's auto sector is perhaps the most terrifying example of how fragile this system really is. The automotive industry operates on a philosophy called just in time. It means a car factory in Windsor doesn't keep a warehouse full of parts. They rely on the train to deliver the engine block exactly 4 hours before it is bolted into the car. The parts cross the border back and forth multiple times before the vehicle is finished. It is a seamless dance of logistics, or at least it was. Trump's uncertainty has killed just in time. You cannot run a precision manufacturing operation when the border is a question mark. We are seeing parts getting stuck. We are seeing risk premiums being added to every shipment. The US manufacturers, Ford, GM, the giants, are looking at this chaos and they are doing the math. If it costs more and takes longer to build a car with Canadian parts, they will stop using Canadian parts. They will shift that production to factories in the US or Mexico where the rail lines aren't being held hostage by border politics. This is the deindustrialization of Canada happening in real time. It isn't a factory closing down with a big announcement. It is a slow bleed. It is shift work being reduced. It is orders being canceled. It is the quiet exit of investment. And this brings us to the homeowner. The dream of affordable housing in Canada is already on life support. But this rail crisis might just pull the plug. Lumber and steel are heavy. You don't move them by plane, and you can't efficiently move them long distances by truck. You move them by train. When CN and CPKC hike their freight rates to recover that $550 million, the price of a 2x4 goes up. The price of a steel beam goes up. Construction projects that were marginally profitable suddenly become losers. Developers will pause building. Supply will constrict even further. Just as young people were hoping for a break in the market, the physical cost of building the house is being inflated by a trade war they have no control over. But if you think this is just about economics, you are missing the bigger picture. This is a political setup. We have to look at the calendar. We are in February 2026. In just 5 months, in July 2026, the United States, Canada, and Mexico are set to review the USMCA, the trade deal that replaced NAFTA. This is the most critical deadline in North American history. Donald Trump knows this. He is a man who views every interaction as a transaction and every transaction as a battle for leverage. He is not disrupting the rail network by accident. He is doing it to soften the ground. By inflicting this pain now, by causing this $500 million loss and making the Canadian economy scream, he is creating a desperate opponent. When the Canadian negotiators walk into that room in July, they won't be negotiating from a position of strength. They will be negotiating with a gun to their head. Their railways will be failing, their inflation will be rising, and their industries will be begging for relief. Trump will look across the table and say, your system is broken. You are an unreliable partner. If you want the border to open up, if you want the trains to run smoothly again, you need to give us everything. He will demand total access to Canada's dairy market. He will demand control over energy exports. He will demand concessions on water and sovereignty that no Canadian Prime Minister would ever normally agree to. But with the economy buckling under the weight of this supply chain shock, Canada might not have a choice. This is the July ultimatum. The chaos we are seeing today is just the preparation for the surrender he expects in the summer, and the danger escalates even further because there is a human element we haven't touched on yet: the workers. While CN and CPKC are losing hundreds of millions, the people who actually operate the trains, the engineers, the yard workers, the teamsters, are watching their own cost of living skyrocket. They are going to demand higher wages to keep up with inflation. But the companies claiming poverty because of the trade war will refuse. We are staring down the barrel of a massive labor revolt this spring. Imagine the scenario. The border is already clogged by Trump's policies. The prices are already high, and then suddenly the trains stop moving entirely because the workers walk off the job. A rail strike in the middle of a trade war is the economic equivalent of a heart attack. It would shut down the entire Canadian economy in 48 hours. The grocery shelves would go empty, the fuel terminals would run dry, and the leverage that the United States has over Canada would become absolute. The scary part is that this isn't a worst case scenario prediction anymore. The pieces are already moving into place. The financial reports from this week were the confirmation that the stress is real. The system is bending. There is a concept in geopolitics called structural decoupling. It is the nuclear option of trade. It means that two economies that used to be joined at the hip start to tear themselves apart. For the last 30 years, Canada and the US were effectively one economy. We built things together, we moved things together. The border was just a line on a map. What we are witnessing in 2026 is the end of that era. US companies are starting to view Canada not as a partner, but as a risk. When a CEO in Chicago sees that CN Rail is losing money and that the border is unpredictable, they don't think, let's help Canada. They think, let's get out of Canada. They are diversifying their supply chains away from the north. They are looking for suppliers who don't have a tariff target on their back. Once those supply chains move, they do not come back. If a car plant moves its engine sourcing to Tennessee or Texas, it is gone forever. This is the long-term threat that is far scarier than a temporary dip in the stock market. We are risking a permanent reduction in the standard of living for everyone north of the 49th parallel. The government in Ottawa is trying to put a brave face on this. They are talking about mitigation strategies and retaliatory tariffs. But you cannot retaliate against gravity. The United States is 10 times the size of Canada. They can absorb the pain of a broken supply chain. They can print money to bail out their own industries. Canada cannot. When you look at the Global Trade Analysis Project data, the disparity is shocking. A full-blown trade war knocks a fraction of a percentage point off the US GDP. It hurts, but it's a bruise. For Canada, it knocks off 3, 4, maybe 5% of GDP. That is a depression. That is mass unemployment. That is the destruction of the social safety net. So when you see that headline about CN Rail and CPKC losing $550 million, do not scroll past it. Do not think it is just business news. That number is the sound of the countdown clock ticking. The infrastructure that holds our modern lives together, the invisible network that brings you your food, your car, your house, and your job, is being dismantled piece by piece as a negotiating tactic. The rail lines that were built to unite a continent are now being used to divide it. As we head toward the spring of 2026, the question is not whether the prices will go up. They will. The question is not whether the economy will slow down. It is already happening. The real question, the one that should keep you up at night, is whether the backbone of the Canadian economy can withstand this pressure for 5 more months until the July deadline. Because if the rail network cracks, if the labor force revolts, or if the Americans decide to simply walk away from the table, we aren't just looking at a recession. We are looking at a fundamental collapse of the North American order. The trains are slowing down. The costs are piling up. And the silence is over. The only thing left to do now is brace for the impact.